More money for education. Prop 123 passes 2 days after this week's special election.
It will bring at least some money into the classrooms, into the schools right away, so that districts can prioritize at this moment, what can I do for the students, what can I do for the employees.
No recount for the close race, so what's next for the controversial funding measure?
Everybody I know that was against this is for more money for schools and is for more money for teachers. This plan didn't do it. This is so damaging to our schools and our teachers and our children over the long haul.
One lawsuit filed. Will Prop 123 end up in the courts? This is Arizona Week. Prop 123 passed this week, a funding initiative to settle a long-standing lawsuit repaying schools for money held back during the recession. Now that Prop 123 has passed, an estimated $3.5 billion is headed into Arizona classrooms over the next 10 years. A razor-thin election too close to call until late Thursday afternoon when Prop 123 prevailed. On Thursday afternoon, hours before Prop 123 began to widen its margin, I spoke with State Treasurer Jeff DeWitt, who has said tapping into the state land trust is not a reasonable solution. We've been hearing a lot about trust. Where does that, and I'm not talking about the state land trust, but trusting the governor and the state legislature, is that what happened here?
The Prop 123 itself, and it's not a general term of trust, but the proposition itself was saying one thing and doing another. And so that proposition itself busted the trust with a lot of people that actually read it. And so the advertising they were doing, more money for teachers, won't raise taxes, all these things they were saying, when people would read the language of the bill, they would realize that's not the case. And so there was a big loss of trust between that proposition, which then I think carries over, and everyone says, oh, it's just politics as usual, which it kind of is. The politicians and the establishment needs to learn that if they want to get things done, they just need to be honest with the public. Tell us what they want to do and draft a bill that does what they tell us. Prop 123 is so different in reality from the messaging they put on TV and the people that realized it saw it, and that was, a disintegration of trust, and that led to a lot of no votes itself.
For those who voted no, is this about not wanting more money for education?
Absolutely not. Everybody I know, including myself, that voted no, wants more money for our schools and wants more money for our teachers. And the funny thing is, if Prop 123 goes down, there's a very high likelihood that the schools and the teachers will get more money. Because if Prop 123 fails, then it reverts back to the judgment that the schools already had in their hands, which gives the schools a lot more money. So, no, everybody I know that was against this is for more money for schools and is for more money for teachers. This plan didn't do it. This is so damaging to our schools and our teachers and our children over the long haul. It sets up a 10-year cliff. It raids the school's own money. It gives teachers, basically their IRAs early in a way when you're looking at the trust. So it's just the way that this was being done that everyone didn't like. But the end result of getting more money to teachers, if this goes down, we can do this a lot better if we can just get the politicians on board to actually solve the problem in a sustainable fashion that won't, be such a problem for our schools in the long haul.
What happens if Prop 123 passes? What happens if it fails? What's the aftermath in Phoenix at the Capitol?
Well, if Prop 123 passes, there will be a litany of lawsuits. I think we've already seeing some of that come about now, because A, it was drafted very poorly, and there are so many legal holes in it. The only publicly available legal opinion about the constitutionality of Proposition 123 is the one that is available on my website at aztreasury.gov, which says we cannot do this anyways. So the only legal opinion out there saying we can't do it, and I think there's just going to be a whole mess. It's going to be a mess if it passes, a big mess of lawsuits, everything else. And when you see the fact, too, that that state law was broken in how the election was handled. Our Secretary of State absolutely, broke the law, and according to our Attorney General, broke the law, and she did. She didn't get the publicity pamphlets out. That disenfranchised over 400,000 voters by not getting the pamphlet about what this was about before they had an opportunity to vote. So, it's one of these things that it's going to be a big mess if it passes. If it fails, we have to get back to the drafting board right away and fix this problem. We can fix it in a day. But that's where we need our governor, our legislature and the schools, everybody, to get around the table. Let's come up with a real solution, a good one this time. And you know what? It doesn't even have to go to the voters. That's the worst thing about it. To fix this the right way, to use the extra money we already have, we can do this in a reasonable and sustainable fashion in one day. You know, they could call a special session and pass it. And honestly, 3 days after this fails, we could have this problem fixed in a very, very good way that would give our schools and our teachers more money, and it wouldn't be a drain on taxpayers. We could actually still cut taxes. There are ways to draft this that are so much better, and we just have to get there.
Arizona has a healthy economic picture, though, at this point right now?
We're doing very well, and that's one of the questions that was asked was, why didn't we, if this is such a great idea, why didn't we do it in the depths of the recession in 2009 and 2010? We've climbed out very well. Arizona, receives net migration of citizens every year. We're one of the states that grows. Our economy grows at over 4% a year if you count the Great Recession over the last 20 years. If you take that out, we're about 6.7% a year growth. We do very, very well. Our finances are back to where they were and better than before the Great Recession. We had one of the biggest tax hauls we've ever had. We were over $700 million higher in our cash operating account than ever in the state's history right after tax time. So we're doing very well. Every sector's come back. We're almost back to peak employment except the construction sector. It's the only sector that still struggles. But now we're doing well. And that's the crazy thing. We have the money to solve this the right way that won't be harmful to our teachers and our schools and our taxpayers over the long haul. That's been my message. I want to do this. I want to get more money to our schools and teachers. I just want to protect taxpayers at the same time and do this in a fiscally responsible way.
All right, Treasurer Jeff DeWitt, thanks so much for joining us from Phoenix. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
The passage of Prop 123 means more money pumped into Arizona classrooms beginning this upcoming school year. Mary Martinez is the president of the Sunnyside Education Association, a district on Tucson's south side.
The big portion of the money, at least in the first 2 years, is going to employee salaries. Okay. So we've negotiated with district leadership through our IBB, which is our interest bargaining group, that everyone will be put on a salary or step schedule. So that includes all teachers, all classified, and all administrators.
Right now, is there a need for teachers or a teacher shortage in the Sunnyside district?
Yes. Last year, we were short about 43 teachers throughout the year. Right now, we're still short teachers for next year. Our contracts have gone out. You know, most of our employees in our district have signed their contracts and they've come back, but because we did have a shortage last year, we continue to have a shortage for next year.
How would you describe the Sunnyside School District?
You know, I love working in the Sunnyside School District. We are a family. We are. We have our communities, you know, our schools, you know, most of our employees stay in the Sunnyside School District for many, many years. It's these past couple of years where we've had the shortages. And this is throughout the state, so it's not just in Sunnyside. And I think just a lot of our teachers, especially, are just trying to make it, you know, financially. And sometimes they leave our district just looking for more money, but it's not because they want to leave our students or our community.
Tell me a little bit about the students, the demographics, and some of the needs in the Sunnyside district.
Our student population, you know, is very, or at least I look at it as very unique. You know, we have different socioeconomic throughout the district. We have, you know, many of our students, you know, live with aunts and uncles and grandparents. You know, we have a huge Hispanic population, a huge ELL population, which is our English language learners. So we have a lot of support staff that supports our students and supports our teachers in the classroom. So I look at us as unique, but it's a really great place to work.
Do you think that Prop 123 has been something that people are aware of and want to support?
I think many people are aware that it's out there. I don't think that they really understand it. I mean, there are so many, you know, ads out there that are confusing to people, so they may see one ad in favor of it and they think they understand it, and then they'll see another ad that's against it and they're like wait a minute. You know, so they kind of get a little even more confused. Yeah. So I'm afraid that maybe some people chose not to vote because they weren't sure which way to vote.
In Pima County, Prop 123 did not pass, or the numbers were not overwhelmingly in support. Based on what you have heard from other teachers and community members, where do you think that disconnect really happened?
I think some of the disconnect is just, as educators, we're not allowed to talk obviously about, political and the different sides of it during the school day, during contract day. So it's very difficult to make our parents aware of what it is, make our community itself, and even our educators aware of the different triggers that were involved in Prop 123, the factual information, but also the pros and the cons of it. So a lot of it had to be outside of the workday or on weekends, through personal emails and stuff. And people are just so overwhelmed that sometimes just trying to read about the information, even that can be confusing to them.
Starting teachers in the Sunnyside Unified School District often make in the mid-30s. Do you think that teachers would maybe stay longer, or the district would have a better opportunity to recruit teachers if salary were higher?
Yes, I do. I definitely do. I think as teachers, and not just in the Sunnyside School District, but just in general, we put a lot of our own monies into our classrooms. So sometimes, when you look at your salary and after retirement, after our medical insurance, which every year goes up, after all of that is taken out, you really don't take a lot home. For myself, I take, a little bit over $900 every 2 weeks. And that's someone with 19 years experience, in education. So a starting teacher that starts, around $33,000, $34,000, that's going to be a lot less than what I'm taking home. And then if you have to spend some of that money in your classroom, it really becomes more of a financial burden sometimes to stay in the profession, because now you have to balance not only, trying to pay your bills, but also how do you get all of the work that's involved in being a classroom teacher nowadays.
And you do spend a lot of your own paycheck outside your classroom, for your classroom, but then also your time is challenged.
Yes. As we spoke a little bit before, I think a lot of people, unless you're in the education profession or a teacher, they don't understand that during the school day, you're with kids for about 6.5 hours in the day. So while you're teaching your kids, while you're monitoring your kids, you can't really grade your papers, you can't really write your lesson plans, you can't really make your copies because your kids are in the classroom with you. So all of that work, either you're going to do at school after the kids are gone, or you're going to have to take it home with you. And we have a good chunk of teachers, a good percentage that have second jobs, even third jobs. So then you're finding that not only are they trying to get right at contract time to go to their next job, but then they still have to do additional work once they get out of that job. So there's a lot more involved than just going to work and teaching the kids and then going home.
Hours after Tuesday's special election, Prop 123 was split, giving hope to groups that oppose the plan. And joining me now is Morgan Abraham from No Prop 123. Morgan, here we are Wednesday. We thought after the election we'd have an answer, but we don't.
Yeah, it's pretty cool to see. I mean, you have a campaign that spent $5 million, nearly $5 million. And you have our campaign, which only spent $15,000, and I think all we were pushing was a message of fiscal responsibility and a message of pro-education. And the voters really kind of grabbed that, ran with it, and it's 50-50 right now. Anything can happen.
This is not a partisan election, as you said.
No, this is far from partisan. The numbers we're seeing right now, you have about 50-50 split on the Democratic side and 50-50 split on the Republican side. So it really is the independent vote that is going to take it one way or another.
What did you think is why we're at this point? I mean, 50-50, a lot of people thought it'd be a definite yes or a definite no, but it's so close.
Well, I think most people thought there was no question this was going to pass overwhelmingly, $5 million, every big political person being for this. I think what you have is you have two reasons to really not like 123, and they come from both the Democrats and the Republican side. You have the fiscal irresponsibility of this. I mean, we are basically spending the next generation's money, and we're spending it now at their expense, and there's going to be a huge cliff in 10 years that we're going to have to deal with, and so the Republicans hate it for that reason. Then you have the fact that this is so anti-education. I mean, we are stealing from future students and future teachers instead of using money from the general fund, and on top of that, we're capping how much education we can spend going forward, a constitutional cap that's going to stay in our Constitution forever. So people on both sides of the aisle are angry about this, and that you're kind of seeing that in the vote.
We hear a lot from your campaign about this will be a fiscal cliff in 10 years. In layman's terms, can you explain how that happens, how the money just dissipates?
Yeah, so the gist is, well, when we're talking about the land trust, when we're talking about this fiscal cliff, so this is a money account that's invested in stocks and bonds. And what the governor proposed, and we'll see if it passes or not, is to draw $2 billion out of that land trust. So as this trust shrinks, the amount it pays out to education also shrinks. So the idea with this trust is it's supposed to stay pretty consistent throughout the years, and that way every generation of Arizonans gets just as much from this trust as the previous generation. So when you pull $2 billion out of this trust, every generation going forward is going to get less money from that, and to the tune of $100 million every single year forever. And that's not our number. That's the number coming straight out of the governor's and the legislature's office.
And there are triggers involved that are also based on, is population a factor, for example, in 10 years?
Yeah, so the biggest trigger is this 49% trigger that stays in our Constitution forever. And what that says is we can't spend more than 49% of our general fund on education, ever. I mean, there's an automatic decrease that will kick in if we hit that. And that's scary because as we shrink the budget, the pie going to schools is going to increase in percentage, even if it doesn't increase in dollar amount. So you never want to handcuff yourself by putting in a constitutional cap, especially if you're pro-education. You want to see more money going to schools. It makes it nearly impossible now.
More money for education, more money for teachers and in the classrooms. Why are people saying this is not the right thing? Is it trust? Is it just this money, this formula?
So I mean, our campaign, first of all, is very pro-education. We want more money for schools. We want it now. All we're saying is there's such a better way of doing things. We have a $600 million budget surplus at the beginning of the session. It's shrinking a little bit because the legislature spent a little bit of it. But we still have the money to settle this lawsuit. And that's what Prop 123 is all about, is a lawsuit. We can settle this lawsuit with just the money in our accounts. So we don't have to rob from the next generation, which is going to negatively impact teachers and students. So we want to spend more, and we want to spend even more after Prop 123 money gets distributed. We think we're in an education crisis, and we need to kind of bump that up. But this is not the right way, and this is only making the problem worse.
Even if Prop 123 does pass and the numbers change, there's more money for classrooms, it doesn't change those per pupil spending that Arizona will continue to rank toward the bottom.
And that's one thing our campaign's been saying as well, is it's dangerous to think that this proposition solves anything, because it doesn't. We're going to stay at 49th percent. On average, we're talking about a 2% bump to money going to schools. So even though you're hearing about these crazy teacher salary increases, which don't seem sustainable to us, 2% bump is the bottom line, and that fixes nothing. We're going to stay at 49th in the country. Teachers are still going to be underpaid, and our students are still not going to have the resources they need.
Prop 123 passes. What's next? Is there a complaint coming from your campaign?
So our campaign is not going to do anything legal. We know of 2 groups that will be filing lawsuits in the next week or so if Proposition 123 passes. I personally will not be involved in those lawsuits. I'm not a big fan of lawyers. I did my best to try to sway the public on this one, and if the public doesn't agree with me, then I'm going to get behind the education community and fight for more money. But yeah, there will be a lawsuit. I'm not quite sure how the legal process is going to play out, but I mean, there's no question that it's wrong to rob from one generation and give it to the next.
If Prop 123 failed, some state legislators were preparing themselves for a special session to address education funding. On Thursday, I spoke with Representative Randy Freese, a House Democrat.
I think this razor-thin election gives us an indication of how displeased the voters are with this plan. 49.5% of people as of today said no up front. And there is a distinct proportion of those who said yes, who don't like this plan, but are voting for it anyway because our schools need money. And they don't trust the legislature to own up to that and do it the right way by using the general fund. So I think the majority of voters in this election don't like the plan. And that means that as a legislature, we should address it. We should try to make it better, tweak it, think about ways that we can protect the fund that people are concerned about damaging the principle. And one of the things I think we should be doing is looking at ways to allow the fund to actually pay out more in times of economic downturns, and then pay out less in economic prosperity, where the general fund is more robust and can fund our schools. And in those times of economic prosperity, the fund can reinvest in itself to protect its principle, so that the next recession, the general fund will be less robust, and then the land trust can step up and pay more to meet our schools' needs. So I think we should be thinking about a very unique kind of out-of-the-box solution like that.
You said people don't, or voters maybe don't trust the legislature. You're a member of the legislature. What is it that you and your colleagues are not doing, or maybe are doing, that is causing part of this problem we're seeing?
Well, one of the things that I noticed is that people talk about funding education, the legislature as a whole talks about funding education, but then the steps we take don't necessarily meet the things that we're saying. And one example, the entire, after the special session in October, the entire session through the late winter, early spring, we were saying more money for schools. Vote for 1, 2, 3, more money for schools. Well, we had our budget come through the legislature this year, the FY17 budget. And one of the amendments that the Democratic caucus put forward was to reinstitute $116 million to what's called the District Additional Assistance Fund, which is money to the classrooms, pay for staff, pay for teachers, pay for supplies. We had that money available in the general fund. This was more money for schools. And every single Republican voted no on that amendment, and every single Democrat voted yes. So we still have this polarizing view of what proper funding is. Now, remember, public education was cut during the recession, whereas corporate tax decreases were kept in place, allowed to phase in. I introduced an amendment in the budget process that would to freeze. There's still another cut coming in corporate taxes. We're currently at 5.5% rate. It's going to go down to 4.9, $200 to $300 million that we could be putting back into our schools that took the brunt of the cuts during the recession. We need to start restoring and reinvesting in public education, because public education brings opportunity to those to improve their lives through getting a better career. And once you get a better career for yourself, your child's life is better. And it's something that does actually trickle down. I think the effects of a good education truly do trickle down.
In your opinion, is Prop 123 the fix, or is it a potential problem for the future?
No, I honestly believe it's a potential problem for the future, and I always start my response to that question is our schools need money. Our teachers need raises, they've been promised, and 123 is the most immediate and easiest way to get that money to our schools, but it is not the best. It is not the most well thought out. There are 2 fiscal cliffs that we're facing. The Prop 301 sales tax is due to expire in 2021, I believe. If we don't address that soon, we're going to have a big problem, again, a big gap where we're going to get that money to get to our schools. And that sales tax is directed to education. So one of the first things that we need to start doing in the next session is talking about renewing that sales tax. It's a 0.6 cent sales tax that goes right to our schools. In fact, I introduced a piece of legislation this past session to address just that. It would have to be done by the voters. So it was a piece of legislation that says put on the ballot, yes, no, should we renew this sales tax for our schools? It didn't move forward.
Chris Ackerley is a Republican serving in the Arizona House of Representatives. He's also a high school teacher.
I was supportive of the proposition. I understand that there was a lot of politics around it, but at the end of the day, the proposition settles a lawsuit about inflationary funding, and that was a necessary step to move forward in conversation about education funding in Arizona.
Were there some areas of the proposition that maybe made you uncomfortable as a legislator, and you're also a school teacher?
I am. Yes, but the thing to keep in mind is that this is not meant to be a final solution for education funding. This was a very narrow, crafted settlement to one small portion of the school funding formula, and that is inflationary funding. And with all settlements, I mean, neither side gets everything that they want. And so at the end of the day, the settlement I thought was reasonably well crafted to move us further. And now there has to be other conversations about education funding. I mean, we still have to address capital funding that really hasn't been funded for almost a decade now. So there are other issues to solve, but this one put an end to that one. Now, I will say that initially when the treasurer came out against it, I mean, 7%, well, 6.9%, which is the expected the distribution from the state trust land. It's tough to imagine that we're going to sustain a 7% return on the state trust land for the next decade. So, but there are mechanisms to help protect the fund. And might dip into it a little bit. But it's also important to keep in mind that the state trust land fund right now only represents about 1.5% of total education funding in Arizona. And even now with the passage of Prop 123, it's still only a little over 3.5% of total education funding. So it's not as if it is the bulk of education funding in the state.
So this fiscal cliff we hear so much about from the opponents of Prop 123, you're saying as a legislator who's been able to really dive into the language, it's not quite what it seems.
Well, there is a fiscal cliff, and in 10 years when the distribution resets to the lower level. But the reality is we have 3 or more fiscal cliffs to face before we even get to that point. As I said, we still have the issue of capital funding to deal with. We have to do the reauthorization of the 301 6/10 of a sales tax in that interim stuff. So we have several other fiscal cliffs to navigate before we actually get to that fact. So we have to have a conversation about how we restructure education funding in this state, one way or another. The fact that this ends in 10 years doesn't change that fact.
Does it bother you as a legislator to hear about these fiscal cliffs and have to vote for them or support them, knowing that it comes with some legs attached to it, if you will?
Well, one of the things that I've learned being in the legislature for the past term, that there's nothing that's really ever permanent, right? I mean, we have quite a few legislative sessions to get through before we get that. And so hopefully we're headed in the right direction. I think the state has turned the corner. I mean, we passed a budget this year that first did no further harm financially to K-12 education, and we reinvested in a lot of other areas. And now with the passage of 123, we will be making a much larger investment in K-12 education. And so hopefully we have turned the corner. Now it's up to us to actually put a plan together to proceed wisely so that, one, we make those critical investments in the state that we need to make and not end up repeating the situations of the past.
You're a high school teacher, the Amphi district in
Yes.
Tucson. What sorts of things are you as an educator looking forward to with the passage of Prop 123?
Well, there was a lot of controversy amongst the opponents that said it's not going to go where it needs to go. But the reality is market forces are dictating that. When I left my physics teaching position in Amphi to go to a math position to serve in the legislature, they were unable to find somebody to replace me. It wasn't that they just couldn't find the right person. There was simply nobody that applied. I believe they have found somebody to replace me for next year. But the reality is almost all school districts are facing critical staffing shortages. So the market forces are dictating that money has to go to class size reduction and teacher salaries, because we simply have to, it simply has to happen in order for us to move forward.
Funding from Prop 123 begins filtering into Arizona school districts later this summer. And this week, Arizona Public Media spoke with a Phoenix man who filed a lawsuit claiming Prop 123 violates the Enabling Act. He also said Congress must approve any changes to the state land trust. Arizona Public Media will continue to follow the story. For all of us at Arizona Public Media, thanks for joining us.